teacher, and school psychologist from Australia and New Zealand, who has dedicated her career to exploring the true essence of inclusivity. Collaborating with colleagues from Melbourne University, she has delved deeply into the concept, focusing on the actions of responsive teachers to foster sustainable learning for all individuals, ensuring lasting educational outcomes. She will facilitate today's catalytic keynote session on the topic Responsive Teaching for Sustainable Learning, a framework for inclusive education. Please give her your warmest welcome. Ma'am, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anne. Welcome. It's wonderful that you can be here to listen to some of the work that I've been involved in. Could we move the slide, please? Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging country, the Indigenous countries on which we have worked, our team has worked to pull together what I'm going to share with you today. Four of us have come from different parts of Australia and have worked in Australia and New Zealand. Bundjalung country, which is the home of Southern Cross University, from one of our members, Anaiwan country, which is where I live in northern New South Wales, and the University of New England was where we started this work in a regional university. Wurundjeri country is where the University of Melbourne is, in Naarm or Melbourne. I also worked for a while in Ngāti Whātua country, the tribal country of an iwi in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present of all these countries and acknowledge that teaching and learning has been carried out for tens of thousands of years in the Australian countries, and we hope that we continue with lots of their traditions. Thank you, Anne. The basis of our work is sustainable learning, which is our conceptualization of what inclusive education is all about. And we have three tenets that make up sustainable learning. It's about learning for all, learning for everybody. And that means that we're going to respond to the enormous diversity that is in all of our classrooms and our schools. We're going to meet the needs of all of the students as learners. Normally, that's where inclusion stops. It's about learning for all. But we also want to bring in a couple of other notions that are really important and integral to what sustainable learning is and inclusive education. Not just learning for all, but learning that lasts. We want learning that sets people up to be amazing global citizens who can engage in our ever-changing dynamic world. That means that we can't teach everything during school time, during people's school learning journeys. We need to be able to set up everybody in the world so that they can continue learning throughout their lives. And we take a capabilities approach to that. We look at what capabilities are needed for people to continue to be lifelong learners when they leave school. And the third dimension of sustainable learning is the teaching. And yes, sometimes we can have learning without there being teaching. Some learners are able to do that, but many, many learners are not, and they depend absolutely on quality teaching. It is the teaching that matters. And in our work, we talk about responsive teaching. Thank you, Anne. So going back to learning for all, this is about responding to the amazing diversity that's in our schools, in our classrooms, in our communities. And instead of seeing that as a problem, as traditionally education has, where we have all of those who are age appropriate or average or normal, and then the other ones. In our way of thinking, we accept that every learner is individual and unique, and there's an incredible diversity that we should really value and tap into. It's wonderful to have lots of different ways for people to see things and to learn about things. The second part of that is that every child can learn. So rather than thinking that some children have such levels of disability they can't learn and we will just need to care for them, or look after them, or support them, or mind them. That's not respectful and it's not appropriate. Instead, every child can learn, and it's up to us, as those who know about teaching and learning, to work out the best ways to teach so that that learning is successful. And the third part there is from international conventions and international values that everyone is entitled to quality education and lifelong learning opportunities. So, learning for all. Learning that lasts means we focus on capabilities. Capabilities are it's a worldwide focus on competencies or competences or capabilities. And we have selected a model that is quite closely derived from the model from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It has 5 capabilities. We have moved them slightly and reframed them slightly, and we start with active learning. We want everyone to be active learners, and we want them to continue being active learners throughout their lives. So we want to build the capabilities of how to be an active learner. Thinking is central to learning, and we need to focus on what thinking capabilities might be needed, both in learning at school and in learning after we've left school. Learning and teaching is social. Life is social. So the capabilities for relating to each other are really core for how successful a student is going to be at school and how successful they will be once they've left school. Using language, symbol systems, and information communication technology is our fourth atrium capability. And it's essential because language and other symbol systems are the ways that we think, the ways that we relate to each other, the ways that we communicate and share understanding. And the last one is managing self. Sorry, Anne. Managing self is about how we become self-regulating and we're able to manage not only our learning, our thinking, our social skills, and our use of language, but our emotions and our levels of frustration and all those sorts of things as well. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about learning that lasts. But it is the teaching that matters. We frame this as responsive teaching for sustainable learning. And in our work right from the beginning, which was in 2015, we started asking, what is it that makes teaching work, that makes responsive teaching work, that makes inclusive teaching work? So that's what I'm going to share with you today. And I'd like you to take the opportunity to reflect on how you see inclusive teaching and whether some of the ideas in this align with what you see or challenge how you see it. Thanks, Anne. This work, most recent work that we've done about responsive teaching for sustainable learning, is the culmination of the work that a team of us have done in Ecuador. We were lucky enough to be able to take our work about responsive teaching, a way to teach inclusively, to Ecuador. And we spent a week initially with these 250 practicing teachers in a school hall talking about what inclusive education is and how we can do it. We were really nervous about taking our work to a country that has a different culture, a different continent, a different language. But as soon as we visited one of their schools, we realised that the issues that we deal with in education in Australia and New Zealand, very similar to those in education in Ecuador as well. So a lot of it resonated totally appropriately. And I think our frameworks are structured in such a way that they can be taken and reworked for other cultures, for other contexts. The Spanish there, a responsive teacher is fundamental to inclusive education, and that's what we were talking about. Thanks, Anne. So, responsive teachers, how do we do it? Well, we've got a number of key principles here, and the first one is that responsive teachers are reflective. They think about what they're doing, they consider what else they could have done, and they also think about what impact they've had as they've been making professional decisions and engaging with students. And they're evaluative. So they work out what it is that worked and then make decisions about what to do next. So we have a responsive teaching cycle here that has a set of 8 reflective questions. And the last one, which is a bit silly for me to start at the last one, but the last one is, how did my teaching support my students' learning? And that's us being totally reflective and evaluative. All the other steps are also reflective, but they lead up to this last one. Thanks, Anne. Responsive teaching is influenced by lots and lots of things and happens within a really complex ecology. So the influences that come from international conventions affect what we do in our classrooms. The national laws around education and around supporting people with disability and providing access for people with disability also influence what we do in our educational settings. And then we move through the closer layers: education systems, curriculum, teacher registration, which is a very powerful framework now that's influencing how teachers enact inclusive education in the classroom. And then we also have the community and cultural context within which all of our teaching and learning happens. And there are influences from all of those. And can we just go back a second, please, Anne? I just want to show that that's step number 1 in the responsive teaching framework, which is, what frameworks do I need to consider? So what are the influences within which I'm working that I need to take account of? Thank you. At the centre of all teaching and learning are the people, and teaching and student relationships are core to how effective we're going to be as teachers and how successful our students are going to be as learners. And if we can have really successful, mutually respectful relationships, we will get much better teaching and learning. So it's right at the centre, and it's really, really important. Within that relationship, we have the students who bring things to their learning, but responsive teachers also bring their own influences, and they need to reflect on what they bring, not just professionally in terms of teaching skills and knowledge. That's important, but it's certainly not the be-all and end-all. In fact, some of the other aspects are more profoundly important, and particularly cultural competence. In Australia, we have many different cultures in our classrooms. We also have the context of being a colonised nation, so that we have people who represent settlers or the colonisers, like me, walking into a classroom, perhaps with some students who are members of the Indigenous community, and that has to affect how I'm seen and how I can establish relationships with the students and with their families. We need to be conscious of that and what influence it has on us as teachers, on our students and how they see us. The third dimension, sorry, I'll just go back, please. Thank you. The third dimension is, what assumptions do we bring about what we're doing? And in terms of inclusive education, it's assumptions around disabilities, it's assumptions around giftedness, behaviours, and learning difficulties. And how we see those will affect how we engage with a student who turns up who maybe has a label of a disability or giftedness. So what are our immediate reactions to that? And how are we going to engage with what that might mean for that particular student? So this is step number 2 in the responsive teaching framework, which is what do I bring as a teacher? And knowing ourselves culturally and as teachers is really important. The next step is thinking about not just focusing on a class, which is often what teachers are taught to do, how to organise and manage a group of learners. But we have to also focus on individual learners within that group. It's a big call. It's really difficult, but you can watch teachers who do this beautifully. And in the graphic that I've put there, we slip between the outside set of questions, which are to do with the group of learners or the class, and the inside set of questions from steps 3 to 8, which help you focus on individual students. For example, step 3, what do my students bring as learners? And step 3, with a focus on an individual, is what does this student bring as a learner? So we have to step forward into focusing on individuals and step back and focus on the group all the time. And again, I watch good teachers, effective teachers, they just do this. They do this naturally. That's how they engage with a group socially and also with the individuals in that group. Continuing that notion of focusing on the class group and on individual learners, we have steps 3, 4, and 5. What do my students bring as learners? We've already talked about that. What do I need to teach now? How do I teach for all my learners? So this is a focus on the group and on individual learners. And one of the notions that we push here, I beg your pardon, the light just went off. One of the notions we push here is flexibly using small groups and individual teaching, as well as whole group teaching. And again, if you watch an experienced, really good responsive teacher, you will see them doing it in everything they do. They will take time to clarify something for an individual, or they'll notice that a particular student needs something a bit different, but they also know that 2 other students in the class would benefit from that. So they pull them together and deal with that and then send them back to the larger group. So this flexible use of small groups and individual teaching are essential for responsive teaching. Thanks, Anne. This is a really key aspect of responsive teaching as well. Responsive teachers use evidence. They use evidence in all their decision making right around the 8 steps of responsive teaching, but they don't just rely on research evidence. Research evidence is really good for giving direction for how you might be able to teach a certain part of the curriculum, for maybe helping you understand in a preliminary way a particular condition or disability, but you need to go further than that and find out what that means for that particular individual. And in all your decision making as a teacher, you're going to use 3 other types of evidence as well. So these 3 other types of evidence mediate the research evidence, because the research evidence is not about what's happening in your educational setting, with your community, in your culture. It's about some other set of circumstances. It can be really valuable because we have some accepted protocols around what we see as what works, but it's a starting point for us. It's not the be all and end all. The other types of evidence are those that you get from your own professional experience, what you've practiced, what you've found might work, things you've tried, and you will draw on that consciously and unconsciously in all your decision making and in all your interactions with your students. The next type of evidence is that from students and families, and this is particularly important for students who come with barriers associated with a disability or who have had really discouraged school experiences. who have great difficulty becoming an effective learner. Rather than us just trying something that scientific research suggests we should do, we need to check out whether that's been tried before and under what conditions, and then make decisions about whether that's appropriate or not, and often in collaboration with family and student about what they already know about what might work. And the fourth type of evidence is that we gather all the time while we're teaching. It's the assessment that we do. It's the data we collect about the students' learning. So all of those four are really important, and they help us decide how we're going to teach for all our learners, which is step number 5. Thanks, Anne. Evidence from research is really helpful in helping us get a handle on what sorts of teaching approaches we might be going to use. And the current evidence, and there is an enormous body of it, has led us to identify these as the key teaching approaches that we should be using. We don't just use one, we're going to use a mix of those depending on what it is we're teaching and what our current student needs might be. But the general flavour is it needs to be culturally responsive, it needs to be differentiated, different for different learners, it needs to be explicit if the type of learning that you want requires explicit. Cooperative group teaching is more effective than individualised and individual activity teaching, and collaboration amongst teachers is really valuable as well. So that helps us make some decisions about how to teach for all our learners. 6 and 7 there are to do with assessment and formative assessment, assessment that helps inform our decision making is this gathering of evidence as we're teaching. And also feedback, giving feedback and receiving feedback about what works in teaching and learning. And those two aspects are also used to help us decide how to teach for all our learners. Thanks, Anne. Responsive teaching is differentiated. It needs to be different for different people at different times. And we've already given some notion of how we do that in terms of making small groups, individual, large groups. But generally, the research points us to using universal design for learning as the starting point. And as we get to know our students more as learners and we understand more in a more nuanced way how they learn, we become more responsive so that we will curate the types of opportunities for learning that we're going to offer. And we will make sure that we give them just enough challenge to move them that bit further. So that is the really big challenge for us as teachers. Thanks, Anne. Many of you will have seen multi-tiered systems of support or tiered models of providing more intensive teaching or more targeted teaching for some students at some times. We've actually taken the tiers and put them on top of each other and made them into layers because we see them as all working together. You don't move from one to the other or back. You might move into and then back down into layer 1, which is universal evidence-based teaching for the class. Then we see small group or individual short-term teaching, and just about every child in a class can benefit from that at some time. And the third layer is small group or individual teaching that might need to be longer term, and that might be for a student, for example, who needs to learn Braille. And there might not be other children in the class who need to learn Braille, so this student might need some more individual tuition in that particular development of that symbol system so that they can become really competent with it. So we see these layers of teaching as really important. Thank you, Anne. There's lots of research evidence about the types of activities to give students for learning. Basically, universal design for learning is a really good starting point, and there are a few other aspects of that that I won't go into now, but they can be really good guidelines for us as well. Thank you, Anne. This is quite a complex model, but this is how we see responsive teaching for sustainable learning, or RT for SL, which we've shortened it to as we've worked on it. You may not be able to read all the words, which is absolutely fine, but the general picture is that there are layers of influence on the teaching, which is between teacher and student in the middle. We've put the layers of responsive teaching in there. That's what students and teachers are going to navigate together and negotiate together. Research evidence has given us the type of teaching approaches and the learning opportunities we should be offering. And the final circle there in the bottom right-hand corner is about leadership for responsive teaching. And it's not surprisingly, we get the same themes that come through for leadership, that it's about good teaching and learning, that it's about valuing diversity. It's shared leadership so that it doesn't stop when a particular leader moves on. We also accept that teachers are leaders themselves. Thank you. These are some assumptions of RT for SL that are provocative for you, something for you to think about, and you can have access to these afterwards to think about, reflect on your own assumptions about teaching. But I think we just need to value diversity. Sorry, Anne. Value the diversity that we have and respond to that in the best possible way. Thank you. So I'd like to hopefully be a catalyst for you to reflect on your views of teaching and how it can be as responsive as possible so that it will be transformative for learners and for our world more widely, and you'll make a difference. So thank you for letting me share our work with you. I hope it's been affirmative and maybe provocative for you.
Yes, thank you very much for your very thought provoking presentation on the topic. We have learned a lot from you in this session. We greatly appreciate your attendance together with everyone present in this session, and we look forward to seeing you in the next sessions too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody.